Hi, and welcome to the Root Health Podcast. Today, I had a fantastic conversation with my friend and colleague, Erik Durak. He is the founder of medhealthfit.com and is one of California's top exercise physiologists and health educators. We had a fantastic conversation about precision wellness and how to integrate this concept into the overall subjects of healthcare, medicine, and fitness through biotech, and how we can improve public health through this evolution of the current paradigm. Hey, Erik, what's happening? How are you doing today?
Hey, how are you, Mr.
I'm excellent, sir. Thank you so much for being on. It is a pleasure.
Oh, well, I remember when we met at the medical fitness conference last year, and you just had some great ideas, and I spent some time on your website this morning, and you just have such a range of things that you're doing. And I know that we're sort of like this kindred spirit here, that you and I are thinking on the same page. And I'm hoping that we're thinking a couple of steps ahead of other people, so we can kind of show some leadership here in what I consider the next phase of the health and fitness industry.
Well, that was exactly my impetus for having you on, is that every single time we talk, even the first time we talked, when I was taking your blood labs analysis certification, it's a terrific conversation, and we're just right on the same page. And, I just thought that, it's something that the general public should be sort of eavesdropping on,
Well,
and as information that they need to push, to really get into that precision wellness and
right.
MediFit, sort of domain.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about blood labs, because I'm going to share some inside information with you that I think is going to just be astounding. 2 years ago, on my local cable access TV show, I interviewed a doctor named Craig Brandman, and he had developed at the time a company that was doing online blood laboratories. And in our discussion, he said to me, Erik, 90% of physicians' decision making about a patient's trajectory is based on the results of blood labs. And I'm like, well, if blood labs are so darn important for doctors, how come they're not important for exercise professionals? And probably part of the reason is that you have to be certified, licensed to be a phlebotomist. You have to use, you got blood that you have to literally take from someone's body. So you've got bloody swabs, you've got cleanup, you've got gray top tubes, and all this kind of stuff that you have to use. And then you have medical waste. You've got sharps containers. You have all these things that go along with the blood lab industry. And it's a huge industry. I mean, you've got, all these companies who vie for, the blood lab dollars, and all these doctors, even with weight management programs, they can't get billed for the weight loss, but they can bill for the blood lab. So they do them every week. So I'm working with a company in Louisiana who is part of a consortium of groups, a university, a Dallas-based company that is developing a blood lab company, a blood lab process using breath analysis.
That's amazing.
And I'm like, okay, well, how do you do that? So I spoke with one of the doctors who's involved with this, and he says, well, we're using mass spectroscopy. And I said, okay, well, mass spectroscopy's been around for a long time. And so essentially I got more and more information, got off the phone with them, and I said, I'm going to have to find out more about this. So I spoke with my old boss from a local research center here in Santa Barbara. And I said to him, I said, Chuck, these guys want to do breath analysis based on mass spectroscopy. What do you think about that? And he goes, well, Erik, we did mass spectroscopy when you worked at Samsung back in the 80s. And I said, well, what were you using it for? How did, tell me some more about this. And he said, essentially, it's the gold standard. Every time you breathe into a tube, it measures the molecular signature. So cholesterol has a different signature than triglyceride, which has a different, than blood sugar, which has a different signature than A1C molecule, which is part of a red blood cell, which has a different signature than a white blood cell, et cetera, et cetera. So, hundreds and hundreds of blood components, and they all have a different signature. But you can measure with a swab, right? You can do a cheek
Hmm.
sample and you can get a saliva sample, and you can now get called what's called a sebaceous sample, where you rub the, on the nose or something, so you get a little bit of not sweat, but the oil glands. So
Really?
oil glands in your skin, the sebaceous oil glands actually have the components of some of the lipid things that you would normally test for. You can get a urine analysis, you can get a fecal occult stool, you can get all kinds of things from the body that will give you information about certain types of things, right? And it just depends
Absolutely.
on how you want to collect and analyze the data. So people don't really understand what is in, breath, other than bacteria, which we're learning about with the whole COVID thing here.
Yeah.
But when I spoke with Dr. Peterson, I was pretty much at ease that this technology is going to be good and it's going to be really easy to use. So this company in Texas wants to have a mobile box, probably about this big, that you would be able to have in your center.
That would be terrific.
So, and then it just have a tube. Everyone gets just a tube. They can plug it into the side, breathe in, and you can get a collection, whatever is on, whatever you want. It's like in a hamburger restaurant. You want a cheeseburger, you hit the cheeseburger button.
Yeah.
You want a strawberry shake, you hit the strawberry shake button, and a regular fry. So all of those things come
So
out.
it's a little like a breathalyzer.
It's like a breath,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
you use breath analysis right now for alcohol and a number of other things,
Oh yeah.
and they've had to have a what they call a positive predictive value based on a laboratory assessment. So the breathalyzer that the police officer uses for alcohol in your breath, right? You can do the same thing with cholesterol. You can do the same thing with other types of things. We just have to figure out what their area under the curve is related to their mass spectroscopy. And then they have to convert it to milligrams per deciliter, because that's what the public understands. You
Exactly.
know,
Well, and that's interesting because you all those things that you mentioned in terms of, I work with a company called Curicology down in Orange County,
Mhm.
and we do the saliva and urine. And what they test for is they look for inflammation markers. They look for, they look for protein metabolism. They look for like probably about 14 different biometrics. But whenever I bring this to a physician, they want to know how it measures and exactly the what the correlation is with those blood labs. They want to see, like, how can that be correlated exactly over, because it's something that we have to send it into the lab. So what the breathalyzer that you're talking about is it's first of all, you get the return very quickly, where
Yes.
we have to collect it and we have to send it out. We have to
Yes.
wait for it to come back, wait for a full report,
Yep.
and that's a problem, and that's, or it's a hurdle, I should say.
It's a hurdle. Yeah. Yeah.
And so this sounds like a much better way, because you're getting over those two hurdles that I just described, which is A, the getting it back, and B is the correlation to a medical clinical intervention, or I'm sorry, diagnostic.
Right. In diagnostic, in this type of technology, you look for the sensitivity of a test. Is it actually testing what it's supposed to? And the specificity of a test, will it test the same thing time after time after time after time? Both of those together equal a positive predictive value. And in any test, a positive predictive value over 0.88 is a high correlation. So this breathalyzer test should probably correlate. I think its correlation is up to 0.95, which is essentially the same as the laboratory blood analysis. And back in the 80s, I did the original testing on the diabetes home glucose monitors. We had about 7 or 8 companies, and we actually fed them bloods to each one of them. And we did thousands and thousands of studies to do a correlation coefficient study based on what we already knew the laboratory blood was. So if we got a blood sample that was 96 milligrams per deciliter, each one of those units needed to be around 96 milligrams per deciliter. The ones that were at 83, time after time after time, they weren't any good. We didn't use them. So you're basically, sort of thinning the herd here in terms of what is going to be the best technology. And if we remember that mass spectroscopy is the gold standard, all we have to do is convert it to milligrams per deciliter, and its correlation should be close to 100%, because it's the same measurement, it's just done in a different way.
Well, that's interesting too, because I mean, with that predictive value and showing the correlation to blood labs and the repeatability of the test. And that's a big thing, because, you go into a blood lab, you got to put it in, you got to get them to send it. You have to have your physician order it. And so people are doing it maybe once a year, maybe once
Yep.
every 2 years during their physicals. And what we're doing is we're saying, no, you need it to be actionable and to be able um, to give us information on whether our nutrition or exercise or supplemental intervention has actually taken
Yep.
effect, and we want to see that in an actionable time. And so this bridges that gap, and
Yeah.
that's what we need in our clinics,
Right.
or in our, well, I should say, we're
Our-
more of a studio than a clinic,
right.
but in our studio.
Well, this is what one of the things I learned from Dr. Brandman in my interview with him was that I said, well, don't doctors prescribe blood labs? And he said, well, doctors interpret blood labs. You need to have a physician to interpret just in case something goes wrong. So all of these online blood lab companies have the ability to have a physician on call to interpret a blood lab component that is out of the norm. If there's something wrong, yes, the doctors are there to interpret. With the breath analysis, they have the same system. Whereas they get, based on their technology, they'll get a red flag if someone has something that's out of the norm. And then they'll get a call from a doctor. So the doctors are not out of the loop here in terms of what we need them for. But if we're testing someone every day who's in a diabetes exercise program, and we need to know what their pre-exercise blood sugar is, because remember, exercise is blood sugar dependent. You never want to train someone who's got a 78 milligrams blood sugar in a high intensity exercise, because they're going to keel over on you. But if you do a breath analysis, 3 minutes later you get that lab value, you can dictate what your exercise is, and then you'll take another one after exercise. That's been pretty much standard of care in exercise and diabetes for the last 30 years. Ever since home glucose monitors came out, they have been a windfall to the industry to know real time what that blood sugar is. And we can do the same thing with lactic acid. We can do the same thing with cortisol. We can do the same thing with any type of component that needs to have a real-time analysis. And you mentioned in your studio that you have certain things that you want to look at, but you don't want to see them once a year. You want to see them once a month.
Yeah, we want to see them,
Once a week.
once a month, once a week, once every 3 months is a pretty good one, depending on the person, of course,
Right.
and those are all amazing components. Where do you think, and this just came to mind, is as you mentioned the doctors coming in, where do you think that like concierge medicine, like Forward or Parsley or some of those types of, are you familiar with those?
I'm familiar with concierge medicine because I live in Santa Barbara.
Oh yeah,
we have a number.
absolutely.
We had a doctor here that I worked with 20 years ago. Her name was Dr. Diana Schwartzbein, and she was one of the first concierge doctors who worked with diabetes care. And she had a lot of celebrity people who would come to Santa Barbara. She had a lot of top business people who would come in and do her version of the paleo diet. And I did some exercise programs for the diabetes care. And and she charged accordingly. But I think if I'm hearing your question correctly, that the medical fitness and the physician interaction could be looked at as a type of concierge medicine, except hopefully not at $300 a visit. There are some types of medical interventions. There's a guy down in Orange County who has an integrative cancer clinic, and he's known worldwide. And I'm not saying he doesn't do good work. He does fantastic work, but he charges $25,000.
Yeah, Parsley, I think, is $99 a month, and you can go in as much as you want to the doctor.
Yeah,
That's but they're basically taking diagnostics, reading diagnostics, but they don't include the diagnostics as a part of that fee. You pay outside of that for your Quest labs or whoever they're
right.
connected with, and then the doctor reads it for you and then can give you prescriptions.
Mm-hmm.
So they're more of a membership business model rather than the pay every time you go, or than the traditional model that we have right now.
Right. Well, I want to talk about payment in just a minute, but to sort of finish your question, I see doctors who could have a real value to some of these medical fitness programs. And I'm hopefully working, I think next week we're going to close a deal with a national health club chain to start doing medical fitness, first in a couple centers, and then in California, and then throughout the country, and then hopefully internationally. So we're on a 4-phase plan with them now. And I really see, if I'm a savvy doctor and I like to exercise, I really think that I could work with some of these programs to actually be there one day a week to see patients, like maybe during their nutrition consult or something, and really interpret results with them with the club or the studio. And I just think that that's going to be a win-win for everybody, because I heard some podcast recently that up to 20% of healthcare workers were laid off during COVID. Now, I'm not sure how many are back at work, but there was a time where they were closing clinics and emergency centers and other types of medical offices, en masse. And that is a real problem. And I think that nurses and physician assistants and people who have an understanding of this stuff hopefully could be looking to strengthen these relationships with the health club community, which I know is going to be moving. I have a little inside information here that some of these groups are wanting to move into this pretty quickly. So,
well, that would be fantastic. I mean, I think that one of the drawbacks, well, I guess one of the weaknesses of the health club design right now is the lack of integration. For instance, I was at one point I was the personal training manager at a major chain in another state. And so we had a chiropractor and a physical therapist in the building,
yeah,
but there was no integration,
yeah,
in any way. And we were like, okay, well, yeah, go see Dr. Steve. And Dr. Steve is like, well, oh, who's that? It's like, that there's a chiropractor up there. And so, with me, when I came in, I said, well, I want part of my job to be to integrate, the physical therapist and the chiropractor, because there's no integration with the personal training team. And because it was and that's in the same building, which is, we're trying to integrate the whole industry, and they weren't even doing it in the same building. And it's like, man, how much better would your outcomes and your care be if you were to just integrate those elements? And so getting a doctor in and integrating the doctor in with that, and just having that operationally to be a part of, the care you have, for, proactive preventative care in the, fitness club, that would be, that'd be a fantastic application.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what I see as my new job description here, as I'm moving into my relationship with this health club chain. And I also am closing in on a contract with another health club chain, which is also worldwide, and they want me to be their population health consultant. So I'm going to be publishing data on what they're already doing. They already have what I consider to be one of the top weight management programs. And they're doing it through high intensity interval training, and they do all the biometrics. And they want to look at all of their people in the UK, the United States, Asia, and Australia. They've got clubs everywhere. And they want to start looking at how successful this type of training is, because I'm sure that I'm older than you, Jason. And
yeah, you got I think you have a few more years in the industry than I do.
Yeah, well, and I've been in and out of the industry, but my issue is that when I sort of look at how, the industry has gone, there have been weight loss programs and there have been all these types of things that have been used, but there's always been a couple pieces of the puzzle missing. And one of the things that I think is missing is, what is the best type of training for something like weight loss? And let's stay with weight loss for one reason, because it is the largest comorbidity for COVID-19. So we learned this early on, that the people who had the most severe COVID reactions, hospitalizations, premature deaths, had insulin resistance, obesity, diabetes. Okay, so I'm going to put all those together in one can of soup here. So if we use that methodology, how can we get them to reduce their risk of not just COVID, but cardiovascular disease risk, lowering body fat, lowering inflammation, lowering all these types of things? What's the best type of training? Well, if you went to the American College of Sports Medicine, they're going to say 100, 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise, walking, et cetera. And then you're going to have other people say, that's crap. That's the bare minimum. So what is the best type? So if we get the dose response down, we get the fit model, the frequency, intensity, duration, modality, down, and then we can actually complement that with two things: the blood labs, or in our case, the breath analysis. And the second thing is detailing it with outcomes. So that's what this company wants me to do in terms of population health. And I literally, Jason, for 15 years, 20 years, I've been wanting to develop something in terms of health outcomes. And I wrote it in my book. I wrote an insurance reimbursement book in the mid 1990s. And I've been chipping away at it for decades. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I found a company in LA who was essentially in India. And I tried to get them to work on this, but that didn't work out. But last year, I formed a relationship with a company in Virginia called Weld Health. And they're fairly well known in the industry. And we developed a software program called Healthy Stats. And it works with about 20, 25 medical conditions where you put in initial assessments, initial blood labs, day-to-day therapy sessions where you just tap a button, the intensity, high, medium, low. Oh, today was a high intensity, boom. Was it indoors or outdoors? It was indoors today. Did you do aerobics, strength training? I mean, so it's just the basics of it. We want to figure out what people are doing during their therapy sessions, not just a pre and post analysis. That way we can do things on a regular basis. And so if I want to do a daily blood sugar in diabetes, I can do a daily blood sugar. I could just tap the number in.
It's funny because I was looking at, because I work with, well, that I'm on, Weldy, from per your recommendation. And also I use Trainerize, which is a remote training application, and it has a calendar. And so that's how I approach people when it comes to biokinetics, activities of daily living, stuff like that, putting nutrition in there. And so what they have is they have links in, so that their links to Trainerize can link you to like MyFitnessPal, so you plug it in on MyFitnessPal. And I was gonna talk to John, and see if it was available, as an idea, because then that would even link what we're doing on Trainerize specifically, because that's precision. Our programs are precision. I film an exercise, I give instructions, and then I prescribe that exercise within a workout to a client, and that client watches that, and then we get together, either remotely or in person, and talk about what's working, what's not working.
Right.
And so with all that data put together, that is, that's been what I've been looking for in terms of to show an empirical outcome, rather than, what you were talking about earlier with the American College of Sports Medicine. Theirs is a research outcomes, and as you and I both know that, there's only so much you can test in research. That's why, they tend to test something with less variables. That's why high intensity interval training is so hard to test, but you can show empirical outcomes, rather than, empirical and in the field outcomes, rather than just what's in the lab, where you have to show just what's happening within what we were able to test, what we were able to isolate in terms of variables.
Right.
And so I love what you're doing with that.
Right. And again, I want it to be simple, because literally I think that the gee golly whiz. I used to work with a research person at Sansom Diabetes Center, in my early days, and she was widely considered one of the top diabetes research in the world. But she always had this lingo. She would say, is it a gee golly whiz type of study? Is it something that actually is going to, people are going to say, well, gee golly whiz, that really makes sense. So when I talk about these kind of things, I want people to say, well, in exercise physiology, it's always been about the VO2 max or the body fat percentage, both of which are not used in medicine. So there's no gee golly whiz there, right?
Exactly.
I would venture that most doctors don't even know what a VO2 max is.
I would not disagree with you.
And even though I think it's an important it's an important measurement. I have debated many times with PhDs about its value, like with cancer rehab. Now, you know that I started one of the country's first exercise and cancer programs in 1993. Okay, so a long time ago. And just yesterday, I was back at that same health club talking with my colleague and friend, Paula Lilly, who still is running that program. When I left the club in the mid 90s, she took over the program. So she's had over 7,000 patients go through that program. Not one of them does any type of aerobic testing.
That's very
Hers
interesting.
is strength training. And she's a CSCS for many years. She's got all the credentials. And after 7,000 patients, how are you going to argue with her? You can't, because she's got more experience than pretty much anybody in the country. And when she told me that she does 99% of it is functional strength training, okay, and some balance work, etc. But they have to work on women who have had breast cancer surgeries, men who have had prostate cancer surgeries, people who are having reactions to chemotherapy. There's a whole set of issues that you deal with. And she believes that because strength training is stop and go, or go and stop, exercise, rest, and you can always manipulate the work to rest ratio, which is very important, and that someone can do a set on the leg press. They're fatigued, they can just sit there and rest. Whereas on the bike, they'll go, and then they have to stop, and then they've got to go, so it's not, the protocols are a little bit different. So my issue is that whatever someone's doing, functional fitness, whatever, is that we want the data to be sort of commiserate with what's the most important. And I really think now we're coming into this new field where blood labs will probably be the part of the diagnostic criteria to see how effective the exercise is, just like I did with blood sugars and diabetes years ago.
Absolutely. Because just for an example, I had a client, he was maybe 4 years ago or so. And he had a lot of depression, and he'd come in and, he doesn't look like a skinny guy or anything like that. Or, I'd say, well, have you gotten your testosterone checked? And I said, it's related. And, as you and I both know, as exercise physiologists, if you do heavy strength training in that hypertrophy zone,
Yeah.
then we, in terms of squats and deadlifts, basically full body strength training, you can affect that. And so I kept on suggesting him to go to somewhere and get that testosterone checked. And it's funny because he never did while I was working with him. And he called me like 2 years after that. It says, Jason, you were right. And he says, I got it checked and I started taking, all he did was start taking a supplement. And he started taking a supplement. It was a pre-testosterone supplement that you could get like a GNC or something like that. I think it was D-aspartate or D-aspartic acid or something of that nature. And it showed blood lab effects, and it showed empirical effects, showed outcomes,
Right.
And so and I was like, well, this is the proof in the pudding, and that's, this is only with one person, but what if we can do that with every person, what if we can identify that, 3, 4, 5 years earlier, 10 years earlier, we can definitely steer somebody in a much different direction in terms of exercise prescription, in terms of, adding in, say, okay, let's add in this safe supplement and see what happens. And also we can also see whether, we can make sure that we're monitoring to make sure that it's safe,
Right.
and with that, just like you mentioned earlier, you can still have the doctor involved and looking at the data along with us so that we have those extra eyes from the medical side.
Right. And I think that in my case, one of the caveats that I would have with the medical community is like, listen, we're going to be publishing data. We're going to be submitting data to high impact medical journals, sports medical journals, public health journals, or health promotion journals, etc. Would you like to be part of this? And I think that a lot of doctors would say, hey, for the time it's taking for me to review charts and talk to patients and be a part of the editing of these papers, it's a good use of their time, and they become part of the team. And it's always good to have them to be involved, because there's a, and I don't want to belabor this point, but I'm going to say that medicine is in not very good straits these days. There are so many issues with medicine, and I think that, you know, we're seeing this global takeover of the vaccine industry by Bill Gates and some of these people that I shake my head, because I had a friend of mine ask me today if I would take the vaccine, and I said, this is the least tested, least safe, and most unknown vaccine in the history of vaccines. And I don't understand why people are running to get this thing, other than the fact that they think that their life is going to be back to normal. And I don't necessarily agree with that. But I can't change the world, Jason, but my piece of this is health clubs need to be essential. And that was the essence of my interview with Matthew Janusek on Escape Your Limits. And I believe that health clubs, if they can fine tune what they're doing to do weight loss, cancer care, pain management, functional fitness type programs, and have the outcomes to show these things, they will become an essential business that I think their doors are going to be open for a long time.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because, you know, I think, you know, we have a population that is so focused on that pharmaceutical intervention, even being a preventative intervention, when, you know, it's been proven for years and years and years, since the 40s, that essentially, you know, your immune system is developed at about the same rate as your cardiovascular system. So once you get past that hump in, you know, that 5 metabolic equivalents of cardiovascular, you also see the direct effects of your immune system also increasing along with that, you know, as well as with the metabolic disease and stuff like that. As we start to eliminate those risks, those comorbidity risks in, you know, metabolic disease and cardiovascular disease, you also see the comorbidity risk decrease with with a low immune reaction uh, to external attackers, I guess.
Right. Like any types of
Yeah,
infectious diseases.
that's exactly what I was looking for,
Right.
infectious disease. And
Right.
so if we could show those other metrics, you know, I don't know that we have a metric that's able to be charted necessarily in terms of you know, in terms of showing an individual's immune, you know, immune function to infectious disease. If
Can
there
I,
is, tell me.
can I answer that question, doctor?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I'm doing some work in the cannabis industry right now. I'm trying to make a big shift in my career. And one of the things that I'm really interested in from a research standpoint is cannabis. I have a friend of mine who was diagnosed 11 years ago with stage 4 head and neck cancer. He should have been dead in 6 months. He did a variation of the Rick Simpson protocol, which is a THC cannabis. Essentially, you know, you eat this marijuana goopy stuff, and it helps a lot of people to heal from cancers. And this guy, 11 years later, is still around. So I got interested in the cannabis industry as part of this whole aspect of precision wellness. So one of the things that I'm looking for in terms of infectious disease is what Dr. Dave Neiman looked at with exercise in the immune system back in the late 90s. Natural killer cell, which is the anti-cancer cells, white cell count, macrophage, eosinophils, and the T3, T4 cells. And all of those together have specific markers that they're looking at in terms of infections, but also C-reactive protein, which is looking at total body infections. So if you're eating lots of foods that cause intestinal bloating, that's something that you can actually test with a C-reactive protein. So one of my clients is looking for lipid panels plus C-reactive protein because they want to look at inflammatory markers that could be mitigated as part of an exercise regime. And I think that exercise and changes in the diet can do a great deal. And the use of cannabis, CBD oil especially, there's an expert in my town here who says that CBD oil is probably one of the best things you could take for COVID for the cytokine response. He said it can eliminate the cytokine storm almost 100%. So it begs the question, why are we not looking to CBD, high dose vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, all these other types of things. Okay, exactly. All these types of things that have already been shown in the literature to have an effect, and we're only going down one road. And when I said in my last podcast with Matthew, if you're only looking at one type of quote cure, which this is not, it's not a preventive measure, it's not really a vaccine, it's a gene therapy, and all it's doing is mitigating symptoms. So a person is not actually getting the full immunity from this. I believe I had COVID last year. I was sick as a dog for a couple of days. I got over it. I was back on my bike, back in the gym in 5 days. And again, what I was told in school, what I was, what you read in books when you were a kid, Dr. Spock and all these people, you get the measles or mumps when you're a kid and you're immune for life. And now you've got people in the medical industry who are saying, well, if you get this, you might not be immune for life. And I don't buy that argument. And this is one of the things about this, is that I want to shift the conversation in this country to keep yourself healthy. Let's not worry about all, because people say to me, well, if you don't get this vaccine, I say, I'm not a candidate for this vaccine. I'm not a candidate for any vaccine because I'm choosing another venue for my immune system health. Someday I'm going to pass away. Hopefully I'm old and I've done what I've needed to do and I die in my sleep, which is what most people, but the thing is like I just, the overkill, the overreach of this whole thing is just bizarre to me, that people are going just in one route. And the other thing that bothers me about, well, there's a number of things that bother me, but they're censoring other opinions, and they're basically, they're not telling us all of the things that I think we need. So again, I don't have, or we need to know, I don't have all of the answers, and I certainly am not going to be able to push that industry too much. But I see that my place right now is to make health clubs essential, get them into the medical fitness business, utilize the things like the healthy stats and the blood labs to really make them a part of this whole, continuum of care, which I think is going to be great. And then you and I spoke a little bit before we went on air regarding this whole issue of precision wellness, which your eyes started to twinkle, which means you know quite a bit about
Yeah,
this.
well, it's funny. Well, that's exactly because my bachelor's is kinesiology, and I decided to go for, and I was in the second graduating class for my master's in a program called biomedical diagnostics
Wow.
from the International School of Biomedical Diagnostics from Arizona State. And my goal was, their goal is to make more precision medicine. My goal was to make more precision healthcare. Which there's a slight difference. Medicine includes, medicine is like the reactive care, in, kind of my assessment, I suppose. And then healthcare, I think it starts in the gym, goes through wellness, and then, and maybe even includes physical, PE as a kid. I mean, I think healthcare is a big, a lot broader spectrum, which is, kind of what you've been talking about in terms of including in the continuum of care. So, the reason why my eyes lit up, because I'm like, well, that's exactly why I paired those two things together, was in order to have that exact outcome that you were just talking about.
Right. Well, let me, I want to tell you a brief story, but I want to preface that by saying that I've been reading the Journal of Precision Medicine for about 4 or 5 years now. And I read it not because I'm a doctor interested in precision wellness. I read it because I'm an outsider looking to see what they're trying to accomplish with precision wellness. And what I believe Optum and a lot of these health plans are doing is they're trying to use precision wellness to strengthen the case for today's medical system, which I think is in a shambles. But with precision wellness, and I'll give you one example, in the greater New York metropolitan area, there were 600,000 people in a health plan, and a good percentage of them started dropping out of the health plan. So what they did is they used an AI technology to figure out what these people were doing. So they had a lot of information about them, internet sites they went to, where they lived, are they with another plan? Are they not with anybody else? Are they still taking medications? They put all this stuff into their AI technology, and they said, well, we need to do a specific marketing program for them to see how many we can get back. And they did, I think, a mailing to 12,000 people with essentially some goodies that they wanted to do for them. And they got 3% of those people to come back into the health plan, which they thought was a huge success. So precision wellness to me is sort of looking at the intricate details with AI, machine learning, et cetera, to look at things like diagnostics. And there's a company that has written a number of articles in the journal over the last couple of years about how precision medicine needs to look at diagnostics. In other words, we have to have diagnostic testing for everything. Everything, diagnostic. And it's like, no, we really don't. What we need to do is to keep people healthy. And you guys are, I think, missing the boat here. So 2 years ago, I was at the Medical Fitness Conference in Phoenix, Arizona. And the day before the conference, I stopped in to see a colleague of mine named Mary Swanson. And people in the industry know that she was the person who invented Silver Sneakers program back in the 90s. So she's retired from that. She owns some health clubs in the Phoenix area. She's doing great. And I'm sitting after class with her and we're talking about some things. And she goes, there's a guy up in Scottsdale. You need to go see his club. And I just said, well, I'm going to be up there this afternoon. So I go up there and I see this place. It's called Cerulean Advanced Fitness and Wellness. And it's essentially a precision wellness center. There's no strength training equipment there. There's a pulse electromagnetic frequency. There's a nano V cellular repair machine. There's a hypobaric chamber, and there's a cryotherapy chamber, and there's compression sleeves. So this guy's in the business of precision wellness. So I said to him, what the hell is all this stuff? And then I went in, he told me about it. I did the hypobaric chamber, which they have specific protocols. And then I started doing research on, what the heck is nano V and why are you breathing in this steam and what good is it for you? Well, then I found out about Upgrade Labs in Santa Monica, which is, down by where you are. And they're also in Beverly Hills. And then I found out about iCryo, which is based out of Dallas, Texas. And then I found out about OsteoStrong, which is the bone health company. And I'm putting OsteoStrong into the realm of precision wellness, because even though it's strength training, it's still a very precise, they're looking at a very precise thing with it. It's not just an exercise program.
Yeah, they're looking at bone density,
right?
So which is one specific marker, and that's what we look at in our it's one of our major markers in our fall prevention programs.
Right. So when I was looking at all of these modalities, which is what I'm going to call them, and I look at nano V, and I'm like, well, what is nano V good for? And the owner of Cerulean in Scottsdale, Arizona, Fabrice told me, he says, if my father, who died of cancer, if I would have gotten him on the nano V and the PEMF machine, he'd still be here today. And I said, well, that's a pretty big statement. And so he explained to me how during chemotherapy, during inflammation process, during this, that, or the other thing, that the protein strands become unfurled. They're not producing ATP. The cell is essentially dying. And what the PEMF, the hypobaric therapies are doing is detoxing the cell, restoring the cell, getting the ATP production, getting the mitochondria to work at a super functional level because of using these things. And again, the protocols I don't know yet. But I'm looking at these things for cancer care. I'm looking at these things for back care. I had a friend of mine use cryotherapy twice, Jason. He did it twice. Mm-hmm. He had back pain for 10 years. He was an old aerobics teacher and step teacher for 25 years. He said, I did this twice. And he's almost 70 years old now. He says, I was pain-free for over 6 months. 2 sessions.
That's absolutely amazing.
Right. And I'm thinking that we need to be looking at these things as an adjunct to the medical fitness. I'm thinking cancer care. So I was with Paula yesterday. I talked with her about her strength training programs. But what if someone could do, after their strength programs, they could sign up for a nano V session for 20 minutes.
Well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because that's exactly what our clinic is. Our studio is, that but we just don't have that much room to have all of that, but we've been looking at all of that. The hyperbaric chambers, we've known about that for a long time. We looked at it in terms of performance. So with that, you're right. Yeah. You get the cells to kind of because you're changing the pressure.
Right.
Same thing you do with altitude training. You do
Yep.
it for cardiovascular training with the compression sleeves. There's a place over in Inglewood that does compression sleeves, and each of their machines is like the $20,000 machines, not the not the ones you see in the.
Right. The Normatec is pretty much used by the industry here.
Yeah, the Normatec are the ones that are used by the industry. They're about $1,000 per per sleeve. These are like 20 grand.
Yeah, that's a company out of Germany. They're the ones who perfected the research 30 years ago.
Yeah, I think they're called Heart something or something like that. But
Yeah,
they're
but
in England.
it's I think it's Compressor Pro or something. But there's a couple companies that have been in the industry for a long time, and their stuff is cloth and whatever. It's a different way of doing it. But anything that you use, I think, and let me go with the hypobaric chamber, because when
Sure.
people think of hyperbarics, you get into the chamber, you got nitrogen narcosis, the bends, you got to stay in there for whatever 45 minutes to an hour until you've got this stuff out of your system. But what Fabrice and his group are doing in Scottsdale is you get into the chamber and they're not pushing you down in altitude. Like, when we studied exercise physiology, we looked at atmospheres going down, like diving, and what it does to the lungs, what it does to the tissue, what it does to the gas exchange and all that stuff. But they're taking you up in altitude. So what he does is he'll take you up to about 3,000 feet over a couple minutes, and then he'll immediately drop you down to zero. And you can just feel your whole body kind of expands a little bit. Your ears pop and all this
Yeah.
stuff. And then over time, they'll take you up to 9,000 feet and drop you down to zero. And they're saying that by doing this, they're sort of expanding the cell, and then all of a sudden, boom, it goes down to sea level, and it sort of decompresses and detoxes the cell, because it's like squeezing out a dirty sponge with water. Is that you're filling it up with water, then you squeeze it and all of that stuff comes out. That's what they're trying to. I think some of this stuff is brilliant. And a general thing that I'm going to say is I think the combination of medical fitness and precision wellness is going to revolutionize the industry. Yes or no?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I totally agree with you. I mean, that's what our business plan is, and the category that you're talking about is what we would deem like passive recovery or
Yep.
passive training, because you're
Passive
not putting any effort into it and you have no compression. Whereas if you're running, you have constant compression on the joints. There's a little bit of a drawback to it. If you're squatting, you have compression on the joints. There's a little bit of a drawback. There's a little bit of a chance of overtraining, stuff like that. What this does is replace some of those training modalities, like take
Yep.
sauna work. If you do sauna work, they show that a lot of the, just dry sauna work, you go into a dry sauna at 180 degrees for 20 minutes, you're accomplishing a lot of what you would accomplish doing heating up your body through doing a long run.
Right.
And so you're seeing some of the same physiological effects from those passive training or passive recovery
I
techniques.
love that term, passive training.
Yeah,
So that's going to be a huge, you and I are going to have to collaborate on a paper about this, because passive training and active training together, I think, are really a big healthcare solution. I'm loving what you're talking about here. You know this very well. And I there's so many possibilities here, so many possibilities.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, Eric, I mean, we are 2 times, so thank you
How
very
much
much.
do we have? Like we have 4 minutes to go, 5 minutes to go.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay,
If
so
you have.
I want to finish with one thing, because in the industry, and we talked about healthy stats, we talked about blood labs, we talked about precision wellness, these new components in the bucket of soup that I talk about. Well, how do you pay for all this stuff? Right. And when I wrote my book on insurance reimbursement 25 years ago, I was interested in this because I got reimbursed for some of my diabetes programs through
Mhm.
this doctor. And I thought she was pretty cutting edge back then. But here we are 25 years later, and people are talking about, well, let's change the CPT codes, and let's do this and let's do that, and let's get exercise physiologists licensed again. So the Medical Fitness Association is talking about licensing people, and I'm like, no. Silver Sneakers became a well-known program because they went directly to the health plans. Well, I was in Phoenix again about 2 months ago, and I met with a company there that is a regional healthcare provider. So they do your basic stuff. They do catastrophic. They do whatever people would need for just general medical. but they're also moving in the direction of what I'm going to call wellness reimbursement. So they want to reimburse for massage, Reiki work, chiropractic, medical fitness. And what I did is I talked him into putting down some numbers for precision wellness, because I think it's going to be very important that that gets reimbursed at some level. And he wants to roll this out as a national company in 2022. So in the next 6 to 10 months, there's going to be a national program where a company can buy in, they can have their employees be a part of this core health insurance, which would not only pay for their basic medical needs, you know, their yearly physical, et cetera, but it'll pay for regular blood work, and it'll pay for medical fitness, and it'll pay for precision wellness. It'll pay for these things. And the more you use them, Jason, the more incentive points you get on your health premiums to reduce the cost. So
I would love that.
The more they do, the cheaper your health insurance come. Wow, isn't that common sense?
It's funny because I've been looking at that for a long time and trying to say, well, hey, let's find a way to incentivize through insurance companies, because the insurance companies is like because I actually had my health insurance licenses a long time ago, right after college. You know, was in finance for a little while, and so I had my insurance licenses, so I knew how it worked. You know, and I said, well, so they don't want to decrease their demand too much, but they do want to increase their outgo by, you know, so if you incentivize the public,
Right.
then you can, as a business, the insurance industry can kind of meet that balance.
Right.
You know, they could kind of meet that balance by incentivizing you with with lower costs for your insurance, because insurance really is supposed to be for reactive. You know, so it's like if you switch over to car insurance, your car insurance doesn't pay for you to get oil changes. But
right, but your car insurance and your health insurance are sort of different, because people like to say, well, I've got life insurance, I've got fire insurance, I've got all these other types of things. So if there's a fire, it will pay for this. But I'm saying that if you had a program that would help you to mitigate fire risk,
exactly,
then and health is a little bit different, is that you don't want to have a catastrophic event. A car accident's one thing, but most insurance right now is looking at chronic disease, which can all be mitigated.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I was going to say is as well, with my comparison to auto insurance, is like, well, maybe they should incentivize you. They don't pay for the oil change, but maybe they should incentivize you to get the oil change. And
what if you became a healthy driver and you went to, most people get driver's ed in high school.
Yes.
But what if you went through an advanced driver program like the Smith system or something like this? These are national programs for fleet vehicles or whatever. And if you actually took an advanced driving course, so you learn how to drive a fleet vehicle or something of that nature, why couldn't you get your insurance lower? That's an incentive.
I completely agree. And that's why it's like, that's different to say that we're paying for it versus we're incentivizing you through lower rates. I mean, I think that's excellent.
And hospital costs, preventive medicine costs, or all of these types of things are so expensive. Everything about medicine is so expensive. And I don't want to get into specifics, but I think that if we can incentivize the wellness and we start working with the health plans, like Silver Sneakers did, like American Specialty Health has done, like other companies have done at a very small level, we want to work on a national level, then we can start to change the discourse. Because I mentioned in my other podcast a couple of weeks ago, when your incentive to get a vaccine is to get a Krispy Kreme donut every year
that's horrible.
every year, and I said to them, that's the problem. That is exactly the problem in this country, that people are so, they're ignorant about the fact that they don't need to have this if they cut this out or if they change that. And again, this is we're headed into a wall here in this country, health-wise. Even Bobby Kennedy said with the childhood vaccines, he said there's going to be so much autism in the United States that by 2030, he said, we're going to be paying trillions of dollars just for children with lifetime care for autism. Well, the obesity, no one's even talked about the obesity, the cancer, the medical mistakes, the all of these other things that are also contributing to these factors. And that's what this whole infectious disease thing here right now. It's ripped off the gaping wound that is our dysfunctional healthcare system.
Well, and it has to do with, just the mass amount of bad chemicals and
Yeah,
bad chemicals, that's in your food. It's about
your
uh,
water.
your water, just everything that you're living in an unhealthy environment. And so when you start putting, other external things into your body, sometimes the system overloads.
Yeah,
And whether that's autism or whether that's obesity or whether that's metabolic disease or cancer or whatever, it's almost like chronic disease all has its same core root. And I think that's where we're all trying to get to, is trying to get to that root and trying to, pull it out, and say, like, let's figure out what a human is supposed to be doing physiologically and what the system responds to physiologically, and how can we use our current technology, because we're not going to go back in time,
yeah,
so how are we going to use our current technology rather than having our current technology be a weight and a negative thing, like our cars,
yeah,
kind of destroying our biomechanics and causing chronic pain and all that kind of stuff, but how can we use it in the other way?
right.
How can we get it to marry? And I think that we're switching the pendulum to go back in that other direction.
And I really do believe that after all the years I've been able to think about an industry and what COVID has done, COVID has had a lot of people sort of stop and think about what can we do. And my thing is that this marriage of technology, outcomes, new blood labs, medical fitness, and precision wellness may actually be the proper marriage to get people to have a healthier lifestyle at a pretty inexpensive cost. We're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars here. We're talking about reasonable cost for a certain amount of time, and then we'll look at the outcome. So that's sort of my final thing, is that I think that what we've talked about today is bringing a bunch of things together that are actually going to have a huge impact on people's health and their lives.
I totally agree. Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you for any and all of you who are listening. And I'll talk to you next time on the Root Health Podcast.